Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this local review body meeting of the 14th of August 2023. I'm pleased to say this time I've got the time right. Those of you who don't understand that in-joke will need to watch the last episode. Before I go on, everybody, I would make the necessary introductions. May I firstly introduce myself? I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the local review body, and I have with me today, on my right, Councillor Hugh Anderson, and to my left, Councillor Brian Leishman. We are all, by necessity, members of the Planning Committee. To my far right is Mr. Ross Burton, who is a planning advisor to the LRB, who is not part of the planning department and has had no previous involvement with any of these applications on the agenda today. To my left, beyond Councillor Leishman, is Mr. Colin Elliott, our legal advisor to the LRB, and beyond him, Ms. Jessica Guild from Committee Services. So my first question today, gentlemen, is to ask if we have any declarations of interest. Councillor Anderson.
None.
And Councillor Leishman.
None.
Thank you both. The next part of the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting, and as is usual, I'm the only regular member of the committee, and I would be prepared to accept the minutes as they are, so note that they are the perfect minutes. So, gentlemen, we now move on to the first item of the agenda today, which is item 4.1, and this relates to the erection of two short-term holiday let accommodation units in retrospect, land 75 metres north-east of the Stedding, Kinross, Perth. And I would ask Mr. Burton if you'd introduce the case.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs first. The first photograph shows the application site, bounded in red. You can see it's in a stretch of countryside running parallel to the Dundee Road, the A90, just past the offices of the Globe Foundation. Next slide, please. That's the access from the A90, or that's looking towards the A90 rather, from the access into the site. Next slide, please. And then looking back down the access road past the Globe Foundation offices, you can see it's a single track road. Next slide, please. The bins you see there are the edge of the Globe Foundation office car park. So the site is accessed by the road that runs past that, as you can see, going around a slight bend to the right. Next slide, please. And that's the road as it gets closer to the site. Next slide, please. So the first of the units is a timber building on small stilts with a raised deck area looking onto the grassed area beyond. At the back of it is the road and a parking area. Next slide, please. The other unit is traditional shepherd's hut style accommodation, traditionally on wheels. You can see it's got a black pipe coming out the roof for the heating. As I understand it, they're designed to be off-grid, both of the units. Next slide, please. And this is looking towards the two units along the site. You can see it's got a cleared area, fairly heavily wooded, mature woodlands either side and beyond. Next slide, please. And then looking back down the site, past the shepherd's hut, you can see it's got an outdoor seating area at ground level. Next slide, please. And that fence denotes the edge of the site, looking past the larger of the two units. Next slide, please. And that's looking from the shepherd's hut down. There's no delineation, but the edge of the site is roughly where the lamppost, not the lamppost, the timber supporting post for the telephone wires are. Next slide, please. Okay. So, retrospective planning permission is sought for the siting of two holiday lodges on land to the east of the Globe Foundation offices off the A90, close to junction 11 of the M90. The lodges have been in position since September 2021 and came to the Council's attention through an enforcement complaint and subsequent enforcement action. The structures are timber and each has one room. One has a curved roof and is slightly elevated with a raised deck. The other is flat roofed, mounted on wheels with a decking area at ground level. They're both reached by a single track road which runs past the offices of the Globe Foundation, the applicant. The site is long and narrow with trees on all sides and slopes down from the road. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicant cited the huts as an experiment, following similar structures in the Highlands, as they thought there was a lack of small self-catering accommodation on the side of Perth. The site is less than 2 kilometres from the city centre, and while it's in the Greenbelt, the fact that it comprises 2 small timber buildings, is screened by mature trees, and is adjacent to a motorway junction and a small office building, it does not undermine the character of the Greenbelt. The site is accessible by a footpath and cycle route and close to bus stops, so cannot be said to be inaccessible or unsustainable. The proposal complies with policies 13, 14, 29 and 30 of National Planning Framework 4 and policies 1B and 60B of the Local Development Plan. To summarise the handling report, the site is 1.1 kilometres out with the Perth settlement boundary and is accessed via a private road from the eastbound A85 trunk road. Part of the site is designated by SEPA as having a high probability of surface water flooding, and the entire site is within the Perth City Air Quality Management Area and the River Tay catchment boundary. The huts have been in place since summer 2021, and the application has been submitted following a planning enforcement investigation. National Planning Framework 4, Policy 29, Rural Development states, under paragraph A, development proposals that contribute to the viability, sustainability and diversity of rural communities and local rural economy will be supported. 10 sub-criteria are listed, but none have direct relevance to the proposal, which is not a land use business, a diversification of an existing business, a production and processing facility, an essential community service, essential infrastructure, reuse of a building, use of a heritage asset, reuse of a brownfield land, small-scale development to support new ways of working, or improvement or restoration of the natural environment. Paragraph B of that policy says that development proposals in rural areas should be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area, and should consider how the development will contribute towards local living and take into account the transport needs of the development. The scale and siting, at least with the application boundary itself, may meet this criterion in part. However, the proposal is unlikely to contribute towards local living and likely to be car dependent. It does not therefore fully meet the relevant requirements of National Planning Framework Policy 29. National Planning Framework 4 Policy 30, Tourism, Section D, states that proposals for huts will be supported where the nature and scale of the development is compatible with the surrounding area and the proposal complies with relevant good practice guidance. In this instance, the 2 cabins would make a modest contribution to the local economy by providing visitor accommodation near Perth. The nature and scale of the proposal is modest and the impact on the local community is low. However, the site does not promote sustainable travel, accessibility for disabled people, and is silent on carbon emissions. The proposal has also overstated the opportunities for access to the natural environment because of its inconvenient location for guests who do not own a private car, and the fact that the extensive Canoe Hill walking routes are accessed via the opposite side of the hill to this site, which lies near the base of the sheer cliff face of the hill. The landscape impact of the proposal is not significant. However, the proposal is contrary to rural development and greenbelt policies and sustainable travel aspirations as stated elsewhere in this report. The proposal fails to accord with the aims of National Planning Framework 4, Policy 30, Tourism. NPF 4 Policy 8, Greenbelts, supports development for proposals for leisure and tourism uses subject to the following requirements. Reasons are provided why a greenbelt location is essential and why it can't be located on a site out with the greenbelt. The purpose of the greenbelt is not undermined. The proposal is compatible with the surrounding established countryside and landscape character. The proposal is at an appropriate scale, massing and external appearance. There will be no significant long-term impacts on the environmental quality of the greenbelt. The proposal is for tourism but does not provide convenient opportunities for access to the open countryside. It has not been demonstrated why the greenbelt location is essential other than being in the applicant's ownership. and the unjustified development of the site undermines the purpose of the green belt immediately with the Perth settlement boundary. So it fails to accord with National Planning Framework 4 Policy 8. Local Development Plan Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification is relevant. This states that the Council will give favourable consideration to the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in rural areas. There's a preference that this will generally be within or adjacent to existing settlements. Sites out with settlements may be acceptable where they offer opportunities to diversify an existing business or are related to an existing site-specific resource or opportunity. It goes on to state that proposals for new tourism developments must be justified through a business plan. The sites out with the settlement boundary within Greenbelt between the southeastern cliff face of Canoe Hill and the 85 Trunk Road. The proposal is not accompanied by a business plan, and the submitted planning statement fails to identify a site-specific resource or opportunity to justify the development in this location. While the current prices of accommodation appear to be affordable, this does not alone justify the creation of tourism accommodation in a countryside location. The proposal is therefore considered to conflict with the aims of Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification. Local Development Plan Policy 43, Greenbelt, permits development if it can be demonstrated that the development either supports an established use or develops a new business within the Greenbelt which has a direct relationship to the land. The applicant has not demonstrated this and appears to have misinterpreted what this criterion requires. The units have no particular relationship to the site or its established use other than being within the applicant's ownership, so therefore fail to meet this criterion. The same policy, Policy 43, subsection D, it constitutes uses which advance the Council's aims of improving public access to the countryside around Perth, including recreational, educational and outdoor sports. Canoe Hill is adjacent, but there is no direct route up Canoe Hill from this site, as it's located at the base of the hill's sheer southeastern cliff face. A convoluted 1.3 kilometre route that pedestrians will be forced to take along the junction approach roads between the application site and Willowgate Activity Centre is hostile and dangerous to pedestrians. The natural preference would be to make this journey by car. Cyclists would also be subject to a hostile environment, having to navigate multiple lanes of the one-way approach roads of the motorway junction before reaching their destination. Policy 43 also requires that development must be appropriate to the overall objectives of the Greenbelt to enhance and protect the character, landscape setting and identity of settlements. In this instance, the proposals do not have a significant landscape impact. However, they have eroded the identity of Perth settlement by introducing unjustified ribbon development into the Greenbelt. Therefore, the proposal is considered to conflict with the aims of Local Development Plan Policy 43 Greenbelt. The proposal's location next to and access from the Trunk Road at Barnhill Interchange fails to create a safe, accessible and inclusive environment for guests and discourages pedestrian, bicycle or public transport use. So the proposal is also considered to conflict with Local Development Plan Policy 1B, Placemaking, NPF Policy 14 and LDP Policy 60B, which seeks to promote sustainable, non-car reliant means of travel. It's also noted in addition that the site has a 10% chance of flooding each year, but the Council's flooding team have not objected, so this does not form a reason for refusal. No representations were received. Material considerations, NPF 4 policies 29 and 30 and Local Development Plan policies 8, 43 and 60B are relevant. A very brief observation on the application. The holiday units were established without the benefit of planning permission, but that should not affect the committee's deliberations. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
Just to inform me, is there any services to these or provided at these two units? Is there sewage connections or is there mains water or electricity taken to them?
That's not something I'm sure of, Councillor. As I understand it, they are intended to be off-grid developments.
I go along this road daily almost and they're invisible from the road just now because the trees are mostly deciduous, so they're in leaf. But once the leaves are away, they'll be more visible, I would suspect, to the eye.
I suspect you're right, Councillor. Certainly the Globe Foundation offices are more visible in the winter from the main from the trunk road.
Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, convener. I have no questions.
And I have no questions either, Mr. Burton. So we'll now move forward. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson?
Ready to proceed.
And Councillor Leishman?
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Anderson, would you start off for us?
I would move for refusal, contrary to so many things that it's been explained to us, the reasons that not have really very much of a leg to stand on at all. So it's very strongly refuse the appeal.
Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, convener. I'm in agreement with Councillor Anderson. I'm of the opinion to refuse. I agree with the planning officer in that the proposal doesn't meet countryside development or promote sustainable travel patterns, as the location seems very dependent on car travel. Location also doesn't provide convenient access to either the wider countryside or Perth city centre unless by car. There is also no business plan based on rural diversification, I believe, and it doesn't meet the Greenbelt policy, so I don't find any justification to depart from the development plan.
Thank you both, and I think I'm going to have to agree with you on this one. I also have a question over this concept of sustainable transport. We are in a rural area, and it's obvious many people travelling to us and to holiday destinations will require a car. So I always have my doubts on that. But although that's a personal thought, in this instance, we have a problem in as much that we don't have a business plan, which is a requirement of Policy 8, and the policy regarding Greenbelt land is extremely strict. And there are only a few exceptions allowed for development in Greenbelt land, which we need to protect. So, and I don't feel there's anything here to warrant overriding that. So I too will have to refuse the appeal. So on this occasion, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision.
Thank you, Convener. Just to be clear, Convener, you did make comments about sustainability, but then you qualified yourself. My understanding is you have refused in line with the appointed officer's reasons for refusal, page 2728, with no changes. Okay.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is number 4.2. This is to do with extension to ancillary accommodation, 6 Main Street, Kelty Bridge, Kelty. I believe the applicants are here with me. I've met them before. So, Mr. Burton, would you kindly introduce the case?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs first. You see the application site bounded in red. The main house at Kelty Bridge is immediately to the west of it and south of it, and there's another building to the south of that, which is the a separate garage which has ancillary accommodation above it. Next slide, please. So this is the access to the site, to the building as a whole. You can see the main house before you, and the ancillary accommodation, which is subject to this application, is on the right hand side. You can just see the upper part of the door to the application property to the right of the house, above the hedge. Next slide, please. So this is the access into the site. There's obviously a parking area adjacent to the main house, and the gate leads to the garden area of the application property. Next slide, please. And there's the front door of the application property. The extension is proposed to continue the building to the right, if you can imagine, along from the gable, so extending it towards the right hand side of the photograph there. Next slide, please. And that's the gable of the application property, which is in rough cast with a small square window. Immediately to the right of that is the main house at Kelty Bridge. The window, which is the subject of one of the refusal reasons as being overshadowed, is the window that's fairly low down and immediately to the right of the application property. Next slide, please. Looking at the application property from the side, you can see a slight delineation in the grass there, which is proposed to be the site delineation between the garden of the main house and the ancillary accommodation. Next slide, please. That's looking towards the hedge, which forms the boundary of the site towards a small lane. The building you see over the other side of, beyond the hedge, is on the other side of the small lane. Next slide, please. And that's looking from, that's looking from looking at the site from adjacent to the stairs leading up to the door of the application property. Next slide, please. And again, looking at the garden area of the main house and the ancillary accommodation. Next slide, please. That's looking at the triple garage, which has other ancillary accommodation above it. The access to the garage is on the far side. There are external stairs leading up to it and a dormer on that side as well. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the house which is immediately adjacent, which the applicant's agent has mentioned in his submission, which, as you can see, was a small stone building which has been extended. Next slide, please. So, planning permission is sought for an extension to a property at 6 Main Street, Kelty Bridge. The property is attached to the eastern side of Bridge House, a substantial stone-built traditional house, and it currently has a bedroom and bathroom at ground floor level and a lounge and kitchen above. It's proposed to extend the upper floor by adding a single room measuring 7.2 by 4.3 metres and a raised terrace measuring 6.9 metres by 2 metres. The extended property would have 2 bedrooms, a kitchen and a lounge dining room. It would be accessed from the driveway, which also serves Bridge House, and the ancillary accommodation which exists above a separate garage to the south of the main house. The proposed extension is similar to that proposed under application 22-01793, which was refused in December 2022. To summarise the applicant's case, the extension is required in order to place the living room and kitchen at the same level as a bedroom, to allow the applicant's grandfather to live in the property. This, to allow the applicant's relative to live here and be cared for, is the main objective of the application. The application property is separate from the main house. The term ancillary should not be used in the description. The proposed extension has been designed with respect to the scale, massing and appearance of the host building in a manner which is similar to an approved extension to the adjacent house to the north. It does not overshadow the adjacent garden to an acceptable degree and does not overlook it, and will not have an adverse impact on the setting of the listed bridge. It complies with policies 14A and B and 16G of National Planning Framework 4 and policies 1A, 1B and C and 17C of the Local Development Plan. To summarise the handling report, developments which are ancillary to an existing domestic dwelling house are generally considered to be acceptable if they are of appropriate proportions, design and with a functional relationship to the host dwelling. The Council's ancillary and annex accommodation Guidance 2021 states that proposals should be minimal in size, i.e. normally 1 bedroom with limited additional living space. The proposal to form a 2-bedroom unit constitutes an excessive provision of ancillary accommodation, which would further reduce the functional relationship to the host dwelling. The proposals are contrary to the Perth and Kinross Council's Ancillary and Annex Accommodation 2021 Supplementary Guidance, which seeks to ensure there's a strong functional relationship between ancillary accommodation and the host dwelling house, and that the extent of ancillary accommodation is reasonable and proportionate. The proposed extension would project 9.3 metres from the rear elevation of the existing ancillary accommodation. As the gable end of the property measures 5.64 metres in width, the proposed extension has a disproportionate projection and excessive proportions. The existing kitchen extension has a much more modest projection, which limits its visual impact. Given the height of the proposed extension and its close proximity to the windows and garden of the host dwelling house, the proposed extension would have a particularly imposing appearance. An attempt has been made to replicate some of the traditional detailing of the host dwelling house by incorporating cross-step gables. However, the gable end is asymmetrical, and the glazing arrangements and keystone lintel details are at odds with the existing building. The design detailing, proportions and expanse of rendered walling on the proposed extension would appear out of place and out of keeping in the context of this building. Additionally, the raised terrace and associated balustrade would create visual clutter, which is uncharacteristic of the building and in a position which is visible from the public road. The proposed extension is also close to the host dwelling house to the west. A vertical 45-degree line drawn down from the proposed gutter line on the north elevation now breaches the midpoint of the adjacent window to the west. A horizontal 45-degree line drawn back from the northeast point of the roof towards the adjacent window would completely cover the window. This means that the proposed extension would have a significant and unacceptable adverse impact on the residential amenity of the adjacent window in terms of overshadowing in the morning and loss of daylight in general. The application property is 30 metres from the northwest of Kelty Bridge, Category B listed structure dating from the 18th century. The location of the proposed extension, terrace and balustrades would be clearly visible from the bridge. Accordingly, given the excessive proportions, unsympathetic design and adverse impact on the visual amenity, the proposed extension would have a detrimental impact on the setting of the bridge. Approval would therefore be contrary to policies 14A and B and 16G and H of National Planning Framework 4, Perth and Kinross Place Making Guide 2020 and policies 1A, 1BC, 17C of the Local Development Plan, the Council's Supplementary Guidance, Ancillary and Annex Accommodation 2021, and policies 7A and C of National Planning Framework 4 and policy 27A of the Local Development Plan, which seek to safeguard the setting of listed buildings from inappropriate development. There were no representations received. With material considerations, National Planning Framework 4, Policy 7, Historic Assets and Places, 14, Design in Place, and 16, Quality Homes, all support high quality new homes. Relevant Local Development Plan policies are 1A, 1BC, 17C, and the Supplementary Guidance on Ancillary Accommodation. Some observations on the proposal. The applicant has made it clear that the accommodation provided by the application property is not seen by them as ancillary, but as a standalone property in its own right, separate from the main house. The planning case officer has made it clear, however, that the Council's planning service views the property as ancillary to the main house. Planning permission was granted in 1994 for the formation of an ancillary granny flat. Granny flat was the term used in the planning application. And in implementing that permission, the accommodation that is the subject of this application was formed. That 1994 permission has never been varied to allow the use of the property as anything other than ancillary accommodation. The conclusion, therefore, is that the established planning status of the property, which is the subject of this application, is ancillary accommodation. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. I'll kick off on this one for some questions. And it comes back to what you were saying at the end. This is to do with, because obviously this turns on this designation of this part of the property. It's classed at the moment as ancillary. Change of use, can that be done?
Yes, if the planning status of the building were to be, if the applicant were to seek to change the status of the building to make it a standalone separate planning unit, a separate property in its own right, that would need to be the subject of a planning application for change of use.
But if that was done, then the way an application for an extension would be considered in a different way what it is at the moment. Would that be right?
That's correct, Chair. Yes.
Councillor Leishman, any questions for you?
No, thank you, Convener.
And Councillor Anderson.
I find it quite a complicated structure to relate one part to the other, but I say that the main determining part it is ancillary accommodation that we're talking about from an earlier stage rather than independent changeover. I find it a bit too complicated to go. I would find it difficult, yes, to relate one part to the other, and I'm not sure if the advisor would concur with that opinion, or
Not entirely sure what you're asking, Councillor. The proposal is for the accommodation to be provided for, or to be improved for the applicant's grandfather, which would suggest that there's a correlation proposed between the occupants of the two buildings, of the two parts of the building rather. So the operation of the proposed extended accommodation would be as ancillary accommodation. However, the applicant's agent has stated in the appeal papers that they don't see the accommodation as ancillary but as separate in its own right. As we've just clarified via the chair's question, the planning history of the site is such that its planning status is ancillary. So there is a clear link between the main house accommodation and the ancillary accommodation. At the moment, part of that link is the shared access and the shared area for bin collection and so on. I hope that helps.
yeah, so just the link between the main house and this extension. You're saying that one can move freely from one half to the other section of the house, or is it division? Is it divided up? The grandfather has his own protected accommodation, so there's no link from the main house to this extension.
No, that's correct. In the same way as the ancillary accommodation above the garage is not directly linked to the accommodation in the main house, they both have planning permission as ancillary accommodation, but there is no internal link from the main part of the house to either one of them. That's correct.
Sorry, could I just come back with one question based on Councillor Anderson's points? Would it be difficult to get change of use? Is it a complicated process?
The sort of issues that would need to be considered would be access, would be appropriate garden facilities for both, would be any issues of overshadowing, as we've heard about already. Overshadowing between two parts of the same building are seen as less problematic than overshadowing between from one building to another in separate ownerships. It's something that would need to be tested by the submission of an application.
Sorry, if I could come in, may help that obviously from the lawyer's point of view, we're perhaps going too far to kind of comment on an application that's not before you. But what I will say is it might not just be a change of use application that could be submitted. You can have the change of use and extension within the one application, which would obviously all be assessed together at that point. But we are getting into the realms of speculation, obviously.
Thank you both. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Leishman.
Happy to proceed, Convener.
And Councillor Anderson.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this one, and I'll start us off. As Mr. Burton has said, this does turn on the designation of the existing property, what I would class as a grand annex for the sake of designation at the moment. I had an opportunity to visit the site, and unbelievably, although there's only one high street, I found myself walking the wrong direction, got myself lost, but it was an opportune moment because you got a chance to see Kelty Bridge, but also I had to ask directions from a couple of people who both recognised the concept of number 6 Main Street. So it's recognised itself as an entity. Going back to the reasons of referral before we come back to the main point, there's a question of the existing bridge, which is a listed monument, a Grade B listed monument, I believe. But I believe it is a bridge, that's what it is, and its influence should not extend, I don't think, beyond the bridge itself. But if you believe the influence should do, it should extend in all directions. And there are properties in a new road called Abbot Wynd, which I think would be the first one, at least probably closer than Kelty Bridge House. And they seem to have been developed. So I do think the influence of the bridge is probably now very limited. And I would say that that particular reason for refusal, I would think, should be deleted. There's also other point and reason number 2, which is the location and excessive projection and unsympathetic design. I agree that's more subjective, and I would probably think about deleting that one as well. But the whole thing twists on designation of the property. Having visited the site, I have a sympathy for having an extension there. It's reasonably well hidden from the road by hedges. There's no objection from the house next door, and they're well away from it, and they are higher. I appreciate the comments about overshadowing with the extension being built, but this is a family home, and obviously they're all aware of what the consequences of building would be. And in the future, as the planning officer mentions, it could be sold. But the point being, if the extension was to be built, then anybody buying it as a whole or as the individual units would know what they're buying and would make the decision on that base, basically. However, we come back to this question of ancillary accommodation, and this seems to be the point where we are coming up against existing policy. And I think from the questions we've asked and the points we've raised, I believe the way forward, and reluctantly, I think on this occasion, I'm going to have to say we'll have to refuse the appeal. But I think the way forward, and I'm sympathetic to the idea, is that the applicants go for a change of use and possibly an application for an extension at the same time. That's their decision. But I think the priority is to get a change of usage on this, to get it separated from being an ancillary accommodation. And that then opens the door to a more or different approach to an extension being built. So on this occasion, I'm going to have to refuse the application. But I think there's a way forward. I would ask that reason for refusal number 3 is deleted. Number 2 is subjective. I would think it should be taken away, but my colleagues will decide on that one as we go through. But because of fundamentally, because of the rules we have with ancillary accommodation, I'm going to have to refuse it. But I think, as I say, there's a doorway to proceed and to do it quite quickly, probably. Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, there was certainly a lot of information for us to digest in the papers, and after taking a long time to consider and evaluate it all, I think it does come back down to, as you said, it's based on its ancillary usage and its history and what it's registered as currently. I am sympathetic to the need for an extension, same as yourself, but unfortunately, based on the information that we've got just now and what it's classed as, I'm also minded to refuse.
Councillor Anderson.
I'm mindful to refuse, and it's been made quite clear cut by the other councillors why the clear cut way is to refuse, and the future is much brighter following on from the refusal if it's granted. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to Mr. Elliott, could I just ask, I did mention removing condition 3. May I ask your comments on that? Councillor Leishman.
Yes, I'm in agreement. I've nothing really to add to what you've said there, Councillor Braun. I'm with you 100% with that.
Councillor Anderson.
I'm with you too.
So we have a unanimous decision on there, Mr. Elliott.
Just to be clear, you kind of referred to 4 but didn't quite say number 4, but my understanding is you are refusing on, I'm looking at page 127, 128, which were the original grounds of refusal. But my understanding is by unanimous decision you have refused on the basis of the excessive provision of ancillary accommodation, which is ground of refusal number 1, and there's no suggestion of any changes to the terms of that. If I've heard correctly, you're not proposing to refuse on ground 2, 3, and I think 4. Is that correct? I'm not sure about number 4.
3 would be removed, but I think 4 is personally is debatable. But I think we'd have to wait for the next application. Just number 3 to take out. I think at this stage. Yeah.
That's why I was asking about number 4, because
yeah.
it is linked to being ancillary as well,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how it's assessed.
Yeah.
So members are unanimous then that it's refusal on grounds 1 and 4, but remove grounds of refusal 2 and 3.
Up 3 definitely. I didn't ask about number 2, so I'm not sure what my colleagues thought about that.
That was on the design grounds, etc.
Councillor Leishman, any thoughts?
I'm comfortable to go with what Mr. Elliott suggested in number 2.
And Councillor Anderson?
I'm comfortable too.
Okay, fine. Okay, so we've refused on just 1 and 4. I'm sorry it's not the answer you wanted, but I think we've guided you through to a door to go through. I think the crux is the change of use. Okay. Thank you. So we now move on to item 4.3. This is the extension to dwelling house west of Hassendine, Montrose Road at Auchterarder. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs. The application site is a semi-detached house, which is the structure is gable on to Montrose Road, and the application property is the part of the structure which is closest to Montrose Road. This means that they have a long front garden parallel to Montrose Road and a short rear area, part of which is occupied by a timber garage at the back and an existing lean-to extension. The orientation of the house, as you can see on the screen above you, means that it's quite difficult to find adequate space for an extension. Next slide, please. So looking towards the timber garage and the rear of the house, you can see the house is traditional stone, 2-storey, and a fairly substantial hedge leading up to about 3/4 of the way up the ground floor windows between it and the road. Next slide, please. So you can see the roof of the lean-to extension, which has the black flue coming out of it, projecting from it. That is the part which is proposed to be removed, and the new extension would be built there, extending to where the garage stands and outwards towards the hedge. It would project towards the hedge to the same extent as the part of the house to the right, if you follow me. So there would be a kind of U-shaped area within the garden area to the side of the house, created by the extension. Next slide, please. The corner of the extension of the coins that you can see, the corner of the house rather, with the coins you can see is the same as the extension would, the single-storey extension would lead out, would extend as far as that. You can see to the left of the picture there, the lean-to extension, which would be removed to accommodate the new extension. The roofed part of it would extend past the garage, and the flat roof part of it would extend towards the hedge. Next slide, please. And that's a view of the existing lean-to conservatory type extension from the driveway. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the rear wall of the house past the wall of the garage. You can see there's another timber shed behind that. Next slide, please. And looking from inside the house towards the garage, you can see that the extension, as proposed, would clip the end of the garage and would I would, it's not clear, but I am assuming that it would necessitate the removal of the garage. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for the erection of a single-storey extension to a two-storey semi-detached house on Montrose Road. An existing conservatory is proposed to be removed, and an extension which includes a sunroom, utility room and shower room is proposed to be constructed from the rear wall of the property. The extension would be L-shaped. The shower room and utility room would have a pitched roof and would run along the boundary with the neighbouring property, and the sunroom would have a flat roof and would project west towards Montrose Road. The application property is slightly unusual in that it presents its gable, its side elevation to the road, with its front elevation perpendicular to the road. It has a long front garden, a small rear garden. A timber garage that stands close to the conservatory is also proposed according to the drawings to be removed. To summarise the applicant's case, the proposed extensions would not be significantly visible from the street, as it would be single-storey and be partially screened by a hedge and wall. The proposed sunroom would not wrap around the front elevation of the house, it would only impinge marginally on the corner of the building. The proposed materials, natural slate and render, are considered to be acceptable as the house is unlisted and not in a conservation area. To summarise the handling report, alterations and extensions to a dwelling house are generally acceptable in principle, although consideration must be given to their scale, form, massing, design, proportions and external appearance, and whether they would have an adverse impact on visual or residential amenity. While the single-storey height of the proposed extension would be significantly lower than the host dwelling house, its projection from the rear of the building is excessive. The flat-roofed sunroom extension would wrap around the corner of the two-storey offshoot and project towards the road, creating an awkward appearance which is unsympathetic to the traditional dwelling house. Its unacceptable visual impact would be exacerbated by the choice of inappropriate finishing materials. The proposal, by combination of its unsympathetic design, excessive projection and inappropriate materials, would have a detrimental impact on the historic integrity of the house and an adverse impact on the character, appearance and visual amenity of the place. There were no representations submitted. Material considerations: National Planning Framework 4 Policies 16G, 14, 16G, 14 and 16G Household Developments. Local Development Plan Policies 1A, 1BC and 17C are relevant, as is the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Guide 2020. Some observations: the proposed extension is modest in scale, but the position of the house relative to the street makes any extension unusually sensitive. The application property is a large front garden, but small rear garden, so the scope for any extension that is not clearly visible from the street is limited. The applicant suggests in the appeal submission that the timber garage was screened part of the proposed extension, but the proposed drawings show the garage as being removed. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener. I have no questions.
And Councillor Anderson.
Looking at the design, I can see where the new back door is positioned. I'm not quite sure where otherwise on the extensions where one would put a new back door other than the positions that's shown on the plan. Although it steps out line such, but I think that's the obvious place for the rear door. Would you agree?
Certainly the options for the applicant are limited. There are different design solutions which could be found, I think, but they have limited options for the kind of space they're trying to achieve.
Okay, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Leishman.
Again, I'm happy to carry on, Convener.
And Councillor Anderson.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed at this stage. So Councillor Leishman, would you like to lead on this one?
Yes, thank you, Convener Braun. site visits are always useful, and especially so on this one. I found it very beneficial to appreciate the fact that space is at a premium for the residents of the property in trying to achieve an extension. While in the neighbourhood and walking up and down Montrose Road, I thought other properties in the street would have been in keeping with this proposal. It would also largely be obscured from the street. And overall, I'm comfortable in approving the appeal as I feel design accords with the policy.
And Councillor Anderson?
I would agree with moving for approval of this extension. It's making restricted in a restricted area. It's the most obvious way of attending to wishes that other owners would like to do. I think it's the best they could find. Thank you.
Thank you both. I'm afraid I'm going to disagree with both of you on this occasion, which just shows it's not always unanimous. Space is difficult here. I agree with that, and I'm sympathetic to the applicants. But whilst the main part of the extension I think would be acceptable, it's the sun lounge which I think would make the concept just a little bit too claustrophobic, in inverted commas. In this instance, as I understand, they are limited with space, but I just don't feel this design is quite right. I think it could be made better in some way without putting that sun lounge in as it is. Sympathetic to space, as I say, but on this occasion, I just don't feel it works. And I would concur with the agents, with the planning officer's comments. So I would go for refusal of the appeal, but I appreciate that I'm a minority on this one. So, Mr. Elliott, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Convener. My understanding is by majority decision is to approve the application as it accords with the development plan, and your minority opinion, Convener, is in line with the appointed officer granted refusal. Okay.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, number 4.4. And this is a review of condition 2 on planning permission 23/070, change of use of road to form extension to outdoor seating area for a temporary period at 145 to 151 South Street, Perth. And Mr. Burton, again, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures. The application site, bounded in red in front of that bar, and it's as you'll see, the seating area is largely confined to the road carriageway as opposed to the pavement. Next slide, please. So the fairly well established canopies, planters, and fencing, as well as seating areas, taking up some parking areas, which I understand were part of a taxi ride previously. Next slide, please. And it's runs the full width of the building, the loft, that bar, and the loft nightclub. Next slide, please. And you can see the clear separation there from along the footpath. There's a certain amount of seating adjacent to the building. Then there's the public footpath, and then there's the public carriageway of the road, which contains the rest of the seating. Next slide, please. And just from the opposite angle. So permission was granted in March this year for continued use of part of the road in front of that bar and the loft in South Street, Perth. Condition 2 of the consent requires the use of the seating area to cease by Monday the 2nd of October 2023 and the structure to be removed by Friday the 6th of October. The applicant is applying to have condition 2 of the consent reworded to allow the seating to remain in place until 2025 or to be granted on an annual rolling basis. The seating area was installed during the pandemic when councils were advised by the Scottish Government to take a light touch on enforcing such changes of use as long as there were no significant issues of public amenity. Following the experiences of communities throughout Scotland with outdoor seating areas such as this during the pandemic, permitted development rights were extended by the government to allow changes of use such as this without the need for planning permission. The new permitted development rights came into force on the 30th of March 2023, just over a week after the decision on this application was taken. The change effectively grants planning permission for outdoor seating areas such as this as long as the occupier has the consent of the council's road services. To summarise the case for the applicant, the time restriction embodied in condition 2 is unfair and unnecessary and is not in line with other similar consents granted in the city centre. Following a review with the roads engineers, it is felt that the introduction of a maintenance management plan would address and alleviate the roads department's concerns. To summarise the handling report, it's considered that an outdoor seating area in this location would be compatible with its surrounding environs. The proposal is not considered to conflict with the placemaking aims of the LD local development plan or to adversely affect the setting of listed buildings. There is potential for noise from the development to affect residential amenity, although the use of the area during the coronavirus pandemic did not result in any complaints having been received on this by environmental health. Transportation and development have raised concerns about the maintenance of public assets and gullies and about implications on the strategic use of South Street. And following discussion with that service, it is proposed to restrict the temporary timescale by attaching a condition limiting the use until Monday, 2nd of October 2023. It's recognised that this is a lesser timescale than other recent permissions in the city centre, but this is due to the strategic importance of South Street to the road network and the potential difficulty in maintaining the gullies and road network in this location. 3 public representations were received on the grounds of impact on residential amenity by noise generation, loss of car parking bays, and impact on road and pedestrian safety. Material considerations. The change in legislation which has taken place since this decision was taken is material to the determination of the application. Observations on the application. The change in legislation extending permitted development rights for external seating recognises the relative importance of the different issues which this kind of development gives rise to. But the new permitted development rights granted by the change only applies if the use also has the consent of the Council as Roads Authority. That is not the case here. The Council's Transportation Services has not authorised the use, although they have said in response to this application that it would be acceptable for the seating area to remain in place until the date specified in the condition. The Transportation Service has the right, under the Roads Act, to require the removal of the seating area regardless of any planning permission. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
Perhaps, sorry,
Oh,
unusually.
Yes, please come
Yes,
in.
unusually. I don't normally put any comments forward at this stage, but I think this is an important one for you in considering this application. Obviously, Mr. Burton has indicated that there are permitted development rights here. However, there's no roads consent in place, so they don't apply. So you have a planning application before you. However, I'd like to draw you to something that is unusual. I don't normally speak at this stage, but it is something unusual has cropped up. Now, what the applicant is seeking there is taking a review of condition 2, which is granting planning permission but limiting it until October, as Mr. Burton mentioned. And they want to, as Mr. Burton also mentioned, either have consent till 2025 or a rolling annual consent that could be pulled back. However, if I can take, what I'm going to explain is the actual planning application that is before you was only for a 1-year consent. So your remit, or the maximum you can do, is 1 year. So you couldn't do, I don't think you should be doing the 2025 or an annual rolling. So the maximum you can consider here doing, if you feel it's justified, is only a further year on this. I'm obviously not referring to any roads consent or any other issues. I'm only talking about the application before you in itself is limited and you couldn't go beyond that. Of course, it's been notified, people have put in comments, and it's been assessed on that basis. And that's as far as you can go.
Just one point, when we're talking about a year, we mean till March 2024, not a year from today. I'm trying to.
I had thought of this. Of course, the date of refusal was March 20, earlier in March. I think technically it could be done for another full year, but you'd have to think why. You have to take into account all the matters that are before you, including the report of handling, the concerns of transport planning as well. So, but technically it could be a full year. But remember, it's already transport planning's comments are not now, they're a wee while back.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
I just wondered if there's been any taking of the air, quality when you're sitting just adjacent to the main road, which is a main bus route. There's quite a lot of buses on this route as well, rather than the existing seating area, which is against the building with pavement space before the actual roadway in the past. And you've also got this step arrangement further away from the roadman. But I think it's not the most healthy place, I would suggest, to sit and have a drink.
That's not an issue that's before us, Councillor, today. It hasn't been mentioned in any of the papers, either by the report of handling or the applicant.
No, that was my main concern over this being extended for any length of time, which is part of the application. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Leishman.
No questions. Thank you.
Just a couple of points, Mr. Burton. One is there's other seating area adjacent to the window that I presume is not affected by this application. And the second point is I'm just trying to clarify this part about the roads, which is you've mentioned that our roads department, if I heard it right, don't want to go beyond October. Would that be correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it was the planning case officer quite correctly liaised with the roads department, road services, and that was the suggested date by them.
And the other seating area is not affected. The one that gets the window.
Not as far as I'm aware, Councillor.
Convener, sorry, perhaps I could help on that. I did check this myself. The outdoor seating area right at the front door, adjacent to the building, my recollection, I can't find it's in the report of handling, hides a little bit, but you've got, it's the 15 permission. So you've got permanent planning permission, not roads consent, we're only dealing with planning here, but the 15.00202 FLL, permanent retention of outdoor seating area. And you'll see its application approved. So there is permission in place for the seating at the immediate front door, not, of course, for the, if you call it, the old parking bays.
Fine. Okay, thank you, members. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson.
I feel we can determine it now.
And Councillor Leishman.
I'm also happy to carry on. Thank you, Convener.
And I too am the same. So Councillor Anderson, would you like to lead on this one?
I'd like us to, well, agree with the proposal that they should be removed as per early October time, end of submission. And whether that's roads or it's planning, it does, but it's planning, we suggest it should not extend beyond the roads approval, and they should be removed. Now, say, as mentioned about air quality and everything else, the people, that's unfortunately not a planning concern, but I say it will be improved by their removal for the customers of the establishment. So I would be happy for it to end shortly.
And Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener. Judging based on what has been presented, leads me to refusing the application, which I do find disappointing and regrettable, as I have extreme sympathy with the hospitality industry because they've had it incredibly tough over the last few years especially, and I appreciate that businesses have got to try and come up with innovative new ways, especially in the hospitality industry, as I say. So regrettably, unfortunately, I have to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor. I too am afraid I'm going to have to refuse this one as well. I think the point was made that we couldn't go any further than a year anyway, but I think we have to accept the comments of Roads Department that they've said that they want this to be removed by October the 6th, I think it is. I think given their new permissions that they have, Mr. Burton's mentioned, I think we have to accept that that is the case. This obviously always was a temporary arrangement during COVID. COVID's passed. As Councillor Leishman says, I have sympathy for anybody in hospitality and leisure because they were hit the hardest and are desperately trying to recover. But I feel that in this case, we have to go by what our colleagues are saying in roads, and therefore we have to refuse the appeal on that basis. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous one again.
Yes, thank you, Convener. It's a very clear unanimous refusal of review of condition 2. Therefore, it remains as removed by October in the date stated. And obviously, your reasoning is simply that it's not been justified to do that.
Thank you, members. So we now move on to the final paper today. This is number 4.5, which is the part demolition, alterations and extension to a dwelling house at Forest Lodge, Ladywall, Burnham, Dunkeld. Mr. Burton, if you could give this one for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures as usual. The application site is shown on the photograph above, and it's shown on a fairly small scale because it's just to give it context. You can see the A9 and Burnham beyond that. So the application property is quite isolated. You can see it's very much within a clearing with mature woodland on two sides and trees between it and Old Military Road to the north. Next slide, please. And that's the house at the end of the driveway leading to it. You can see it's a single track driveway, and you get a good impression of the isolated nature of the house from this picture. You can see mature woodland behind it. There's also mature woodland to the right hand side of the picture, and as I said, there's a tree belt between it and the main road. Next slide, please. And that's the looking back along the driveway, standing just in front of the house. You can get an idea of its isolation from that. There's another house just at the end of that driveway, which is off. Yeah, there's a small part of shared driveway before you turn left into the driveway for the application property. Next slide, please. So getting closer to the house, you can see there are gates between the access road, at the end of the access road before the house itself. Next slide, please. And looking back through the gates down the access road. Next slide, please. So you can see from this that some of the work to demolish the porch has already taken place. That work doesn't require planning permission, and you can see the single-story garage to the left of the house, which is proposed to be removed and replaced by garage accommodation, which is included in the proposed building. Next slide, please. And that gives you an idea of the side of the house where the application is proposed to extend from. You can see the outbuilding that used to remain there on the left gable of the house has also been removed. The two-story link to the new to the extension, the linked extension, would come out of that side of the house where the darker of the two sides in the picture in front of us. Next slide, please. And looking at the house from behind, the extension would be pretty much where the garage is, but it would be closer to the house, and it would be a two-story extension, not as high as the house, but a similar kind of massing. Next slide, please. And looking at the house from the other side, away from the proposed extension. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for the part demolition, alterations and extension to a two-storey detached house at Ladywall, Burnham. The house has a kitchen, dining room and bedroom on the ground floor and 3 bedrooms and bathroom upstairs. The house is isolated, surrounded on all sides by mature woodland and is not visible from the A822, from which it's reached by means of a private track. It's proposed to demolish 2 single-storey porches to the front and side of the house, to demolish a freestanding garage and build a 2-storey linked extension which will have a bedroom, garage and storage at ground level and a sitting room at first floor level. As part of the project, it's proposed to reconfigure the interior of the existing house to provide a dining kitchen, snug TV room and office on the ground floor, and to retain the 3 bedrooms and bathroom upstairs. The extension is proposed at a slight angle to the main house, linked by a 2-storey element which will form a new front door and entrance hall at ground floor level and a linked corridor to the new sitting room at upper level. It's proposed to be finished in dark timber cladding with a dark pre-patinated zinc roof. To summarise the applicant's case, it's proposed that all site structures are consolidated into a new complementary building to the north of the existing house. The proposed orientation of the extension will provide a sense of enclosure to the entry court, while the separation and angle from the house allows the lodge to be seen in its original form. The materials proposed for the extension are dark opaque thermopine enhanced timber cladding, in order that it will be seen as different from the original house and will blend with the forest. The lower roof height and smaller massing will ensure that it is viewed as subservient to the main house. The proposed extension would ensure the site is not overdeveloped and that the whole building's environmental impact can be minimised. It's proposed to modify the existing house as well as providing an extension in order to maximise the potential for increasing fuel efficiency by improving its insulation. To summarise the handling report, the proposed extension would visually compete with the host dwelling house rather than complement it. Although its scale is subordinate, its poorly integrated design results in a fragmented appearance with a piecemeal wraparound addition. Its visually incongruous appearance would be exacerbated by the sharply contrasting finishing materials. Accordingly, refusal is in line with Policy 14C of National Planning Framework 4, and approval would be contrary to Policies 14A and 16G of National Planning Framework 4, Policies 1A and 1BC of the Local Development Plan, and the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Guide 2020. The application site is located within the River Tay National Scenic Area. However, the domestic scale and nature of the proposal doesn't raise any significant landscape issues. The proposal involves demolition of various existing features which have the potential for bat roosts, a protected species, so it's necessary to secure an ecological survey to identify the presence of any bats, bat roosts or bird nests, so that an assessment can be made over the impact of the development, whether any impact can be avoided, and whether any mitigation measures are necessary. Without an ecological survey, the proposal is not in accordance with Policy 4F of National Planning Framework 4 or Policy 41 of the Local Development Plan. There were no public representations on the application. Material considerations, National Planning Framework 4, Policies 4, 14 and 16G, Household Developments, Local Development Plan Policies 1A, 1BC, 41, and Council Guidance on Placemaking, and the Protection of Bats are all relevant. Some observations. The appeal documentation includes a Phase 1 and 2 bat roost assessment, although not a full ecological survey as required, but this has not in any case been appraised by the Council's ecological officer. A full ecological survey would need to be submitted and assessed before a decision to grant permission could be made. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. I'll open to questions. I don't have any myself. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
I just wondered about public access round about this area, because it's, you said, you know, it's basically unseen as such as the end of a track. I'm not sure there's any core paths in that vicinity that would come into being, although public access is overall the area. Because it's almost as though it would be, is it to the rear of the house, look at the road we see up on the screen here, or is it coming back below, is it below it? I'm not sure, my north, south and east, west, looking at it.
There's no core path there that I'm aware of, Councillor. To answer your first point, the proposed extension is, looking at the photograph on the screen there, is between the application, the existing building and the road. So it will be moving towards the road.
And Councillor Leishman?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Fine, members. Now, we obviously move to the next point, which is to ask, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? If I might lead on this one, I'm of a thought that we perhaps should defer for this ecological survey, which, once done with the existing bat roost, Phase 1 and Phase 2, I think it's called, be passed to the biodiversity officer for their consideration, and then back to the planning officer for a final comment. But I think at this stage I'll ask my two colleagues their thoughts. So Councillor Anderson.
I would be mindful if you wish to defer. I would go along with that. Thank you.
And Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, convener. I would actually be happy to proceed.
Right, okay. Mr. Elliott, a bit of guidance here, please.
I think, member, since there's clear two members wish to defer, and one is happy to proceed, I think in those circumstances you would defer. I think you have to be clear on the terms of deferral. I think, Convener, you're more or less indicated the grounds, the terms of the deferral. I think it would be deferral for the applicant to produce an ecological survey. And secondly, for the biodiversity tree officer, and I think we would say and development management body officer, to comment on firstly the BAT survey received, BAT assessment received, and secondly the ecological survey still to be received that's been requested. And of course, part of the LRB rules, the applicant would be able to comment on that, and then it would return to the LRB at a future date.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to a conclusion for this afternoon. So it remains only for me to thank my two colleagues, Councillor Leishman, Councillor Anderson, for being with me, Mr. Burton and Mr. Elliott, Ms. Guild, for your help. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next LRB at some stage in the future. I shall be here on the next one next month. Thank you very much.